those who do not know what Scratch is, it's a children's programming language that runs in your web browser. You can load and save projects, and its community is responsible for some amazing games, like Getting Over It and Potato Fortnite. And for those who don't know what Blender is a 3D modeling and rendering software where we can make some absolutely amazing animations.
Are you sure?
And some incredible simulations. But what if, hear me out, we make Blender in Scratch? But before we begin, let's set some ground rules. 1. I must make this engine with 0 Scratch tutorials, so no copying someone else's 3D Scratch renderer. 2. It must run inside of Scratch at 20 FPS minimum. And 3. I'm forbidden from using Turbo Warp as that's not truly Scratch. So to begin, we need to identify what makes a Blender up. A Blender is made up of a rendering engine and an editor. To make the rendering engine, we need to be able to store data and render each set of points in the form of a triangle on the screen, taking in relative angles to that of a camera, along with taking into account the world space of both the points and the camera. But why triangles? Well, there are 2 directions I could go with when designing my own render engine. I could use triangles, as I have done, or I could use quads, which are just squares. Each have advantages and disadvantages. Tries allow for easier implementation of rendering, but, big but, limits the usage in the editor as we can't implement loop cuts using triangles, which is a feature of Blender, and modifying a mesh composed entirely of triangles is difficult to implement, making it unsuitable for editing. While quads would allow for loop cuts and high quality editing, it makes rendering difficult as we have to deal with non-planar faces. This is when a face is geometrically infeasible. For example, if I move this point on a square face, it creases along the diagonal, while tri-faces make this impossible, always lying flat against a plane. Now, I could theoretically use both, but that would significantly impact our performance. The rendering calculations are done with this script here. To sum up what it does, it takes the vector 3 coordinates and turns them into a vector 2 format. And to render this picture on the screen, we have this script here, which takes the data that we calculated earlier and draws lines between the points. At least it should do that, man. Oh, this is so painful. Oh, it's too late for this, man. What is going? Nothing is. To edit in an editor, we need an editor that can edit objects rendering on the screen, and editors also need to be able to allow the user to import and export files. There's nothing too fancy about my editor, but the most complex part is selecting a point. To do this, we need to understand what a point is on the rendering side. A point is actually made up of multiple points, with one for each neighboring triangle. So when selecting a point, we're actually selecting around 6 points in the same position. Now, of course, on more complex rendering engines, it shares this point instead of it holding the data for each individual point. It is what it is. But how do you select 6 points? To do this, we simply need to find what common factor they have, which are their 3D coordinates. So we can simply look through all the coordinates to find the 6 points that make up one point, which are called the vertices. Sometimes vertices are only made up of 5 or fewer or 6 or more points, but generally are made up of 6 points in my program. But what haven't I added? It's important to note that this final version has no support for adding faces and removing faces, and that's another downside to using triangles. Even in Blender, a loop cut doesn't allow to split a triangle, and even if I added it, you would get tearing at edges when moving points due to the fact that not all the vertices connect to another vertice. In terms of more complex rendering, I haven't bothered. I've more focused on the raw functionality. So after all this work, the creator of such hits such as Tyrannical Toilet and the Battle of the Beans gives you Blender in Scratch. Now, a quick message from our editor. If this video gets 10,000 likes, I will add ray tracing, or cycles, or some form of fancy rendering. So there it is. Here is my Blender. My Blender? You know what I mean. This is Blender in Scratch. So currently it's version 3.3.1. Obviously added a lot. For example, if we press F, it opens up this thing where we can change between 4 different ones. We've got a sphere. We just got to click it again. Just wait. There we go. Sometimes you just got to double click that to refresh it. Now, there are a few glitches I would like to point out, which is very clear. If I switch back to the cube, we're getting some visual glitches. For example, up here, you can see there's sort of like the roofs coming through. And that's because I'm not sorting the order in which to render these faces. Now, the reason for that is it's very expensive to do on the computing side. So overall, that's why I haven't done that. There are a few other glitches. Like if I switch back to this mode, you can see the side of the wall through. But that's because I'm taking it from this corner and not from the center of the object. A lot of these things I could fix, I just don't. Now, if you go to File and Import, there's one more thing I wanted to show you, and that is this little guy. Now, I'm sure okay, he's upside down. Whatever, you know what, he can live upside down. And I don't remember what he's called in Blender, but he's called something. Suzanne, I think it is. Now, you can see it's got 300 faces. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you than that. It's got... Now, if I load the cube up, you can see that it didn't work. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you hit the subscribe button, the like button, whatever the hype button is. Just hit all the buttons. This video took months to make, and I can also view when this was shared, which was all the way back in December last year. Here's the timeline of this video. This took me a week to edit. If you'd like to join the Discord I've got below, it'd be really cool to see some of the things you guys do. Feel free to remix this. Anyway, until next time, have a good day, goodbye, and don't die.